What is the difference between a big hard belly and a flabby belly? The answer is visceral fat. That is the fat that accumulates in the abdomen around your organs and pushes out against the abdominal wall. It is particularly dangerous fat because it not only will disrupt hormones, it will also cause chronic inflammation that can lead to a host of very dangerous diseases. We're going to talk about how to get rid of visceral fat in this video.
Okay, so we're talking about the difference between that big hard belly and kind of a flabby belly. So the flabby belly is more subcutaneous fat, it's fat under the skin. You know, in my mind, that is the more unsightly kind of fat.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
You know, and we all know, but we all know about the big hard belly, right? Mm-hmm. So this guy has less under his skin, and I'm saying guys, but this guy has less under his skin. You know, but it's all inside and it pushes the belly out. And it always, when I think about this, it always reminds me, you know, and we've seen these guys when we go into the beach, you know, or anywhere. You see big, nice, big, hard belly. Yeah. And this reminds me of an advertisement that was in a magazine, you know, 20 years ago. A guy with a nice big belly and he's wearing a Speedo. And the caption was, just because it fits doesn't mean it's right. And so I think about every time I see it, and we see these, and you see these guys, right?
Well, right, but now you're talking about guys, and I think we probably do associate that big hard belly with guys, but it's not just a male thing. This is what I talk about with menopause being the perfect storm for women as we reach and go past menopause. Belly fat increases, and they don't really know why this association happens. They associate it with the decrease of estrogen, but the reality is that it is easier to put on belly fat on a woman after menopause. And I talk about this as the perfect storm of menopause weight gain because it just takes us in a spiral and a loop then. So after menopause, we get increased belly fat. Well, that leads to increase in insulin resistance, which I'll throw that off to you in just a second. But insulin resistance, well, that causes more belly fat and it causes more cravings, so we get more belly fat. And we just get in this vicious cycle that we have to break.
Right. So insulin resistance can cause this visceral fat, and then the visceral fat can cause more insulin resistance. Right. So it just keeps kind of going around in this cycle and just building on itself. So insulin resistance, we've talked about that before, but it's basically where your cells or your body, they're just not responsive to the effects of insulin anymore. And typically this is because you know, the blood glucose has been high probably from a high carbohydrate or a high refined carbohydrate diet. Blood glucose stays high. The body keeps pumping out insulin, trying to get that glucose out of the blood. And pretty soon the cells are just like, you know, we just don't feel like opening our doors anymore. And then you end up with high insulin levels and that insulin resistance. So that high insulin levels obviously is going to promote more storing of fat and less burning of fat. Right. So visceral fat, and this is dangerous. You know, this is the dangerous side of a fat, as opposed to that flabby outside the gut fat. I mean, that fat is actually healthier than the stuff that's inside. So visceral fat, like you said, it's highly inflammatory. There's different interleukins that it releases, TNF alpha, different compounds that are highly inflammatory to the body. And obviously it creates more insulin resistance. It can also lead to diabetes. And, you know, when you look at the statistics that 2/3 of the population are either pre-diabetic or diabetic, this is a huge problem, you know, and it just leads to more and more chronic diseases, heart disease, some cancers even.
Right. And just metabolic syndrome by itself. And if you've heard of metabolic syndrome, that is just a collection of conditions that when you have these or a portion of these, then you are classified as having metabolic syndrome, which leads to those other things. But this is where it all starts, right? Metabolic syndrome is a collection of symptoms that include high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, low HDLs in your blood, and visceral fat. So, you know, this all leads to a kind of a perfect storm for anybody who's, you know, with talking about weight gain with the belly.
It does. So the question is how to get rid of visceral fat, right? So there are some things you can do. Number one, you want to kind of control that insulin resistance, and you got to control your insulin to do that. So a low carb diet to start with for many people is probably the best way to go. You keep that carbohydrate level low, that keeps the insulin low, and for mild insulin resistance, that might be all you need to do. Now, if you've been insulin resistant for a while, you've got a pretty good amount of visceral fat in there, you may need to take that extra step and go to a ketogenic diet, which is really going to drop those blood sugars way down and keep that insulin level low. And it's going to allow your body to burn that fat. Not just the visceral fat, it's going to burn fat from everywhere, but it's very hard to target just visceral fat. But we do have one little way that has shown some interesting effects on visceral fat.
Well, and specifically on visceral fat, I mean, and we're talking about intermittent fasting. There have been studies that have shown it to be particularly valuable in fighting visceral fat. One clinical study looked at just shortening a window to 10 hours, so you're eating for 10 hours of the day and fasting for 14, was very effective in reducing the metabolic syndrome that I was talking about. And also, if this is a problem for you, if you have a lot of visceral fat, you probably have a lot of insulin resistance. So that's kind of where you want to start. And intermittent fasting can help you quite a bit with that. And in particular, the studies seem to be leaning toward the earlier you start your fast in the evening, the better off you are. There was a study done on 8 pre-diabetic men who finished eating by 3 p.m. and it showed dramatic improvements in their insulin sensitivity. And that's not the only one. There's been others that have been done on even cancer and things like that, where the amount of calories that you consume after 5 p.m. are going to increase your inflammation. So not to get too far off in the weeds, but if you have this issue and you really need to get rid of it for health and for weight, you want to combine a low-carb or keto diet with intermittent fasting. Those two things work so well together because the low-carb or keto diet will help you to go longer in between meals because hunger is so satisfying. So there is a solution out there. You just kind of have to apply it. And if you haven't started with fasting at all, we have resources that you can pick up. We have a free fasting guide, for instance, that we will point to. But that is where it's at. Very valuable thing to work on. And anything else to add?
No hard bellies.
Yeah.
Well, no big hard bellies.
Right. Okay. Is that where you want to end?
Well, yeah, I don't know.
All right. Thanks. See ya. Subscribe and we'll be back soon.
Let's just end it.
Yeah.